Good morning, and welcome back to the second vestibular episode and another episode of PT on Ice. I'm RJ Williams here again to talk a bunch of dizziness stuff for you guys, and just wanted to follow up from Justin's video yesterday with older adults. Thought it was such a great episode, something that we deal with a lot in my clinic as well, dealing with balance-related issues. We work with a lot of seniors, so it was a highly topical comment for me, and I recommend if you didn't get to catch yesterday's episode, go back and do that. And then also wanted to share with everybody, if you didn't hear the news about the PT on Ice store on our website, if you go to, there's a new tab for apparel. It takes you to the ptonice.storenv.com page, and you can go hook yourself up with some sweet new t-shirts and support the PT on Ice brand. I just ordered mine before going live this morning, so hoping it gets here soon, and I'll be wearing it on future live videos. So I want to pick up today kind of where we left off a little bit on the call last week, which was talking about how the vestibular system senses motion, which we talked about yaw, pitch, and roll, and bob, heave, and surge, which was linear acceleration and rotational input coming through the inner ear system. And so one topic that I wanted to start with is that the inner ear always has a constant resting tone. And that's an important concept to first wrap our heads around, because though we're not always experiencing movement, our ears are always providing some input inwards, because gravity is always affecting them. And what we want our body to have the ability to do is be able to sense change in any direction. So the ability to excite higher or inhibit lower from where we're currently at is important. So we don't start at like a baseline of 0 and always go up. The ear always has a degree of neuronal activity, and then it changes positive or negative from there depending on what we're doing. And this is where we start to see some breakdown with the two ears when we have dysfunction. So if the two ears' resting tones start to get off and this ear starts to drift away, now all of a sudden the body may start to perceive that as subtle movement that's occurring even though we're not moving. And this is where we're going to start to look at certain things with using the eyes as clues to what's going on. So one of the pieces that I wanted to talk about first today was our VOR system. So our VOR system is the vestibular ocular reflex. And this is a relationship between the ears and the eyes that allow our visual field to stay clear as we're moving our head and body around. And what I tell patients is, if you think of movies like The Blair Witch Project or anything that's filmed from kind of a first-person point of view, when the person holding the camera starts running from the monster or whatever they're being chased by in the movie, the image starts to get all shaky, and that makes actually a lot of people sick going to the movie theater because it's a very blurry and distorted image that can be somewhat noxious. But the camera in that circumstance is not being optically stabilized. That if you look at the cameras like they use in sporting events with the guy who's running down the sidelines chasing a football player and everything seems perfectly smooth, the camera's on an apparatus to balance out any of the movement so that as the person running with the camera is kind of bouncing up and down, the camera stays stabilized as it moves across the field. And it allows the image to come off to the person viewing it on TV very, very clear. That apparatus is kind of what the vestibular system is doing for our eyes when we would actually be running from the monster in real life. So the way that the VOR system works is we have in an ideal circumstance, we have a perfect inversion of -1. So for every degree per second that my head would move to the right, my eyes are going to move the same degrees opposite of that. If my head tips down, my eyes are going to tip upwards. And what we want to see is anytime we make a little bit of subtle movement, our eyes are going to shift. And at different speeds, we've got different pieces of our neurological system that are going to allow for this. So there's things called smooth pursuit. There's things called saccades. We're going to talk about these things. But the vestibular ocular reflex really kicks in once we start moving our head at some pretty good speeds. And the tighter that our ears and our eyes are linked together, the more clear the images are able to stay. So one of the tests that we can use clinically is a test that we call the head impulse test. And this is something where you sit and hold the patient's head and you're rotating their head side to side, and then you provide a quick thrust into a short arc of motion that provides a great deal of acceleration into the inner ear, and you're looking for their eyes to be able to stay on a target that you've given them. Whether it's a mark on the wall, or if you're far enough away you can use maybe your nose, but you're rotating their head and then you provide a quick thrust into a direction, and you're looking, do their eyes lose the target and have to jump several jumps to get back to the target? Do their eyes overshoot the target and have to come back? Those are both different things. One would suggest to you a little hypo function. The other may suggest to you a little hyper function. But we want to see is the eyes be able to land on the target pretty close with your thrust there. And then you can compare bilaterally. And what we start to see is if we see consistently where off from the target compared to the other, we can start to hypothesize that that may be the ear that's weaker. And we can start to also test this further by using an eye chart on the wall. So if you think about your traditional eye chart that you would use, cover one eye, read this line, read the next line, and the lines get tighter, you can have a patient sit and read the best line that they possibly can. And this gives you a baseline of what we call their static visual acuity. Then we can set a metronome, or there's tests that are actually computer-based where you're wearing a headset that track the movement of your head. And we're going to look for the patient to create an arc of motion, about 20 to 30 degrees of cervical rotation in this yaw plane. We can do it in the pitch plane as well. Can even do it in roll side to side. But we're going to set a tempo that's going to cross that threshold where it's the VOR system that needs to start to take over. And then we want them to start to read the lines off of the eye chart. And what we should see is there should be some degradation of the visual clarity. But we don't want to see a massive drop on the eye chart. And all of a sudden, if we see that their visual clarity drops several lines on the eye chart, we know what we call their dynamic visual acuity is impaired compared to their static visual acuity. And we can start to look at this again side to side, left versus right, or up versus down. And then we can work these into our treatment plans for improving the VOR system alongside the other pieces that we're gonna tease out and want to challenge. Then when we start looking at this stuff in our bedside testing, we want to probably start to entertain the conversation of a tool used in vestibular examination called Frenzel goggles. So they're an advanced tool that we can use to look at people's eyes without the ability for them to fixate on anything. So they're a set of goggles that you would wear over that allow the clinician to see in, but the patient doesn't really have the ability to see out. And then in more advanced testing that uses computer-based testing, there are goggles that have a shield over them, so the patient's in pitch black, and there's infrared goggles in there. They're going to watch the eyes move as you ask them to do certain things or put them in different positions. And why we do this, why we look at the eyes in this type of fashion, is when we remove the ability for the visual system to anchor off of anything in the environment, we may start to see a drift appear. And oftentimes the drift is going to go towards the weaker ear, and then the neurological system is going to snap the eyes back to center. And so this lets us start to see the health of what's going on in the ear that we wouldn't necessarily see bedside. So starting to talk about some of the things that we do bedside in testing, if you've taken any vestibular workshops before in the past or are familiar with this, we always start by scanning what the person's visual field looks like. Are they able to follow into all of the planes of motion that their eyes should be able to track? What's their ocular motility look like? Do they have any visual field losses at all? Then we can start to challenge the system by having them jump between two targets. So if I say, I want you to look at my left finger, I want you to look at my right finger, and I have them switch back and forth, and we see there may become issues with accuracy or speed of moving between the two targets. Then I may have them follow my finger back and forth, and I'm looking for the smoothness and coordination of that. Now, a lot of that stuff, at first, I'm looking more central problems. So if the eyes tracking back and forth looks very jerky, I would suspect that there might be some brainstem or cerebellar issues going on. It'd be the same thing as if I said to my patient, I want you to raise your arm up, and their arm went up very like staccato or almost like cogwheel, where it just was popping through the motion, disjointed in its pattern. So if the eyes look very, what we would call saccadic, they're very jittery as they move across there, that starts to bring question to me of how well is that visual system functioning. Excuse me. And then we can further start to test some of these things to bring in then the peripheral vestibular system by adding vestibular load to it. So that's where the head now has to start moving. So that's doing things like having the patient shake their head, having me shake their head and provide impulses, taking their head off of center and providing impulses in the different planes of the canals is going to start to allow me to tease out what is more so central nervous system related dysfunction and what's more peripheral system related dysfunction. And so when we get the vestibular system involved, that allows me to start challenging that system to see what presentations I see out of the eyes. So we've got to have some sort of head movement there involved to bring that piece on board. When we look at just the eyes with and without fixation, so with the lenses or goggles on and with the lenses or goggles off, again, we're able to start to tease those two pieces out. So if I have a target that I can see and I'm able to suppress that eye motion and I can focus on that target, I should be able to suspect that my central nervous system is able to suppress the little bit of mismatch between my two ears. So if I'm in the dark and my eyes are moving, I'm not quite sure where the problem is yet. But if I bring their visual field back and their eyes are able to lock on and then stay steady, then I can hypothesize that my central nervous system is working well, but my peripheral system, when it didn't have any input, was letting the eyes kind of bounce back and forth in there. Now, if I put them in the dark and their eyes are moving, and then I bring them out of their dark and their eyes are still not moving, then I start to question whether or not the central suppressive systems that should be kicking in are not working as well, and then I may have a complex problem on board. So with that, that's a little bit today on how the eyes and the visual system can provide us some insight into what's going on. And we're going to pick up, I think, next week with some talks on BPPV. So it's definitely something very important that we touch on. And like I said on the call last week, is that it's probably the most comfortable a lot of PTs are in the realm of vestibular, but even what we're taught in school is generally taught at a surface level. So if you guys have questions or things that you want to see covered on the talks on BPPV, please let me know. We'll get that covered next week. And as always with all of our stuff, just a reminder that there's a lot of courses coming up that seem to be going quickly. So would love to get you guys out to Vegas with the team here. It's going to be one epic party of the PT on Ice family. We're going to have so much content across all of our different providers. We're probably going to be partaking in a lot of activities outside of the course with some probably fitness stuff, probably visit a lot of the good hiking spots here in Vegas, and of course seeing everything that we've got downtown to offer as well. So love to have you guys join the Vegas course. Hope to see you there. If not, hope to see you at one of our courses soon. Check out the PT on Ice apparel store, and we'll catch up with you guys next week on some BPPV related things. Thanks for tuning in.